Hey guys, so today I'm going to show you how to make a login form similar to the one you see here from Gmail, which I think is clean and simple. So let's start off by making a new directory, and let's open VS Code. Now let's make a file and let's call it app.html. And get the boilerplate up and running. Let's change the title. Let's call it app and let's start. So to make the form, we're going to give it a form tag. And in the form, we're going to want a header similar to the one we see here. So we're going to want a logo. Let's give this an H2, and this one is going to be an H1, and this is going to be P, a P tag. Okay, let's do that. So we need H2, and let's write Google. You can fill your own title over there, and then this one's going to be H1, and use your account to sign in. And then we're going to have a P tag. Actually, this one is use your account to sign in, and this one is simply sign in. Sign in. Alright, so now what we want to do is we want to make an input field. We want to put one for email and one for password. With Gmail sign-in form, you have to click next to enter your password, but we're just going to put them both on the form. So we're going to style that part slightly differently. So we're going to simply create a new div so we can give it its own little styling. We don't have to actually, but let's do that. You can let's create the div. Let's give a label and email, and then right under that we're going to have an input tag, and type is going to be text because, well, for the email. Type text. And very similarly, we're going to have it for password. So let's just password, and type is going to be password. This makes sure that no one can see the password while it's being typed. Let's create a little space. And next we want to, let's look at what they have. We're going to want another div. This is definitely going to need a new div because the styling is displayed horizontally. So we're going to create a new div, and let's call it button div. And then we're going to have two buttons. One is create account and one is sign in. So let's create a new div, and let's give button and another one, create account, and then we're going to have sign in. Now what we want to do is right now create a style sheet. So let's create style.css, and let's import that at the top. And href equals style. So now let's open it with live server. Style sheet. My bad. Really, it's a style sheet. Okay, so now let's open it with live server. You can install it as an extension on VS Code. Let's see what we have here. Okay, so obviously it's not styled very well yet, but generally we have the form and all its components. So to style it, we're going to have to start giving let's give it class names. Class is equal to form. Okay, so now what we want to do is center the form in the middle of the page. To do that, we're going to style the form, and we're first going to give it a position of absolute, And then from the top, we want to make it 50% distance from the top, 50% of the page, and then from the left, 50%. What that does is it positions the top left corner in the center of the page. The problem with that is we don't want this top corner to be in the center of the page. We want the center of that form to be in the center of the page. To do that, what we do is we transform and we translate. This calculates 50% of the size of the form, or whatever you're styling at that time, and it moves it negative 50% top up and negative 50% to the left. So it's going to calculate 50% of the size of this. So however much it grows, it's going to guarantee that it's going to be in the center of the page. Okay, great. Next, what we want to do is we want to make display flex. We want everything to display as a column. And let's just show you. Everything, generally speaking, is displayed. All little pieces. This, everything is in column form. So we want to give the entire form flex. Flex makes it align horizontally, but we don't want it horizontally. So we're going to change the flex direction to a column. Now, what we want to do is we can create a new div and center all the items in here in the center, or we can simply use classes, access each one by simply typing, for example, h2 and do text align center, and it's going to align that in the center. Or we can give it a new div and simply align all the items in the center. I don't think that's necessary, but for this case, generally it may be appropriate to do that. So we're going to access each one simply by its tag, h1 and p. Now let's do, or we can simply do this. We can do h1 and then we can do p, and they're all centered. Okay, so now what we want to do is style this also as display flex, and then give it a flex direction of column, because we have to specify that this div, because it's its own div, we have to specify how it's going to display. So first we're going to have to give it a class, and let's call it input div, and let's copy that, and we're going to style that. Now all we need to do is display just as we did over here, and give it a flex, and then flex direction, give it a column. Now it's getting similar to this form. Obviously we don't have the password input here, but generally speaking we obviously would want to have it under the email input. So what we want to do now is let's give it a width of, we have to give the form slightly larger width. So let's give it a width of, let's say 300 pixels and see how that looks. And we want to, let's see, it has a border with a slight gray color. So let's try to do that. Let's give it a border, and let's give it 1 pixel and solid, let's say gray, and see how that looks. Okay, that's obviously not, it's a little, so let's use this palette to lighten the color. Great, that's better. And we're going to give it, we want to round the corners of the form, so the borders. So let's do border radius and give it 4 pixels. That looks a little better. And we can give the form padding, which is going to create space between the content. This is the content and the border. Let's give it padding of, let's say 10 pixels. Let's see how that looks. Maybe 15 pixels. It's a little better. Let's see. Let's do more than that. Let's give it 30. That looks a little better. Now what we can do is, we see there's a lot big gap between the headers, title, and the p tag. So now, as we can see there's a lot of space between the titles, or the headers, whatever you call them. So let's remove that margin by specifying that margin is 0. And actually, let's give it margin of 5 pixels. We want a little bit of space. Now, next what we want to do is, let's look at how we have a placeholder. So we're going to add a placeholder, email or phone, and password. So we go to the input and we add placeholder. For password is enter password. And for email, enter email. Okay, great. Now we want to give the input. We can access the input from the input class by doing .input and then typing in input and giving the height. As we can see, we want to give it a height of similar to this. Let's say we can try out different numbers. So let's give it a height of, let's say 40 pixels. Let's see how that looks. That looks alright. Okay, so now, perfect. So we see that the height has changed. Now let's specify the border for the input. Let's go to the input and give it border 1 pixel solid. Let's get gray, solid, and let's make it a light color, and let's give it a border radius also of 4 pixels, which should look good. Okay, so now we want to create a little bit of space between this input and this input. So what we're going to do is we're going to access the label. We're going to do .input div, and the label that's in that class. And we're going to do margin top. Let's give it 10 pixels. And we created the space between the two. Looks a little better. What else do we want to do? Now let's look at what we have here. So now let's create a class name and style this div on our form. So let's give it a name. Let's call it button div. Class is button div. Copy that and let's style it now. And okay, so now what we want to do is we want to give it a display of flex, which simply aligns the items in that div horizontally, and we want to create a space so the items create the maximum space in between each other. So let's do justify content, and we have a method called space between. Now, as we see, it's very similar to how it appears here. And we can also make the width of the form slightly larger. And let's give it around, I think 400 pixels looks good, maybe 300, 380. Let's see, 350. Now, as we see, the button div is also gonna, obviously we want space between this and the input. So let's create margin top. Margin top, let's try 20 pixels and see how that looks. We can do slightly more. That looks a little better. And now we can access the buttons. But if we want to style the buttons differently, we're going to have to identify each one by its own class name or ID. So as we see, each one is styled differently, so we're going to have to give them different names. Let's go and give each one a name. Let's give this one a class of create. Let's just do create button, and let's give this one a class of sign in button. Now create button is going to be styled similar to the one on the Google form, which looks really nice. Let's actually just take the color from the console. So to get the color, we can just take it from here. And let's get the color of, and let's see how that looks. That looks about right. Now we want to get rid of the background. We don't want any background, so background none. And to get rid of the border or the outline, let's try outline and none too. And border none. Now we have no border, and it looks extremely similar to this one. To make it thicker, we're going to have to give it a font weight and try out, let's say, font weight of 400, and let's see how that looks. Nope. Let's try 500. 600. That looks better. Now, as we see, we want the cursor to change to a hand, so let's do cursor and pointer. Now, when you hover over it, you see the little hand. Now, let's style this button and copy the class name. Let's go right here and let's just give it another look to see how it looks. Color is going to be white and the background is going to be blue. Okay, so the color, let's do white, and the background color is perfect. And we obviously do not like that border, so let's get rid of the border. And we want padding. Padding essentially is going to create space between the outer edge, the border, let's say, of the button, and the content inside, which is the words. Okay, so now we want to create padding between the border and the word sign in. So to do that, we simply do padding, and let's do 8 pixels, and we want to make the width a little bit more. Let's try 10 pixels. So maybe even 12. That looks a little bit better. We do even more. Let's try to make it slightly larger. Let's do 15. And as you can see, we also have no effect, hover effect, so let's just copy this, make the cursor pointer. Obviously want to make the border radius similar to the form. Make it look a little bit better, and now it looks better. We can give the weight of the letters make it a little thicker, and that looks better. Okay, now let's see what else we can change on this form. We can, okay, so as we see when we're in focus is when we clicked inside the input, we have a nice blue border. So let's try to do that too. To do that, we simply access, let's go to the input and .input div input, and we use the class focus, and we have to change the outline to none. The default outline, as you see, the black outline is now no more, and now we can do border. We can do our own styling. We're going to give this 2 pixels to make it slightly thicker and solid. Let's copy this blue color. It's a nice blue color. And let's see how this looks. That looks much better. And that's wonderful. Okay, so now what we want to do is just make this form look a little bit better. And to do that, we want to make the padding in the vertical direction a little more than the horizontal. So let's do 40 pixels, and we can even try 50, see how that looks. I think that looks a little bit better, and when you only give 2 inputs in to padding, the first one goes to top and bottom, and the second one goes to right and left. So it's going to be 50 pixels on the top and the bottom, and 30 pixels to the right and the left. So I think it looks a little bit better. And what we want to do is, generally speaking, you want to have a link here to the create account page, which you can call register or sign up. And to do that, let's just go for it. So we're going to add an A tag here, and we're going to say create account, and we're going to give this an href, right? And let's say your route is called register. Now to style that, obviously we have the default styles, a dark blue and an underline. To make it look as it did previously, we can do button div and a to access that link. We can also do simply a, but generally this is slightly safer just in case you have multiple a tags that you want to style differently. So okay, so now what we want to do is give it a text decoration and remove that by saying none. So the underline goes away, and we obviously see that the color has changed. So let's explicitly tell it which color it should be, and ta-da. Now, okay, so now as we can see, when we hover over the create account button, there's a link that will take us to a register page, as you can see on the bottom left of the screen. And let's test it out, and obviously the page doesn't exist, but it works. So that's it. I hope you learned from this tutorial, and thanks for watching.